So I am Jennifer Senior from The Atlantic, and I will be introducing tonight's panel and then explaining what we're all doing here. So on friendship and the friendship reset. To my left, we have Dr. Marissa Franco, who is a professor, a speaker, and an author of the forthcoming book, Platonic, such a good name that I almost don't want to give the subtitle, but I will. How the science of attachment can help you make and keep your friend, help you make and keep friends. Okay, we have Eric Barker, best-selling author of the book Plays Well with Others, and he has been blogging about social science on his website, Barking Up the Wrong Tree, since 2009. And we have Jen Hatmaker, author of a dozen books, putting us to shame, a speaker, a founder of a nonprofit, and podcast host of For the Love. And this is it's a funny panel. It's a panel about friendship, sort of post-pandemic, well, we're mid-pandemic, but how we are rethinking friendship right now at this moment. And I was asked to moderate it. It's a strange thing. I had written a story for The Atlantic in February called It's Friends Who Break Your Heart. And it had this unexpectedly viral life. I had not expected it to have any kind of life at all. And yet it seemed to be very sticky. It seemed to be speaking to people. And so this whole thing was sort of convened around that. And so, not around, just thinking through what friendship means right now at this moment in time. So I'm going to start by asking everyone the same question, which is just a quick status check on our friendships, like right now, what the pandemic has done, because I feel like it's shaped them, reshaped them, misshaped them in ways that we couldn't anticipate, right? So let's start with you.
Yeah, first of all, hi everybody. I'm so happy that you're here because I like to say every time you make a friend, someone else does too. So we're all invested in friendship together. I think for me, after the pandemic, I've realized I have a lot less social energy. And so for me, it's been a process of figuring out how to be very discerning around who I spend my time with because my social energy has been so tapped after spending 2 years in isolation.
Eric, you want to go next?
Well, for me, it was very strange because I was writing a book about relationships during the pandemic. So,
Right.
yeah, just the irony of ironies. Like literally 2 weeks after I closed the book deal, California, where I live, locked down. And so here I am, like, wow, relationships are really important. Wow, the loneliness will kill you. Oh, yeah. So, like, it was really good, sort of productivity-wise, in terms of writing the book, but, like, it was also
Your test tube went away.
a lot of bad habits.
Brand
A lot
stories.
of, yeah.
And what happened? I mean,
We're still working on that.
Mr. Expert. So tell us how it went. I mean, who
I-
did you choose to?
I mean, it's basically trying to get out there and, see my friends. And like in the book, I write about, two key aspects in terms of deepening friendships are time and vulnerability. And, time, pretty good on that one, but like opening up, as a guy, not always so good at that, but like what I've realized is we've all dealt with some difficulties. We've all dealt with challenges, and it's difficulties during the pandemic is something that we can all relate to.
I can't wait to get back to the subject of asymmetries in vulnerability. I think that's a huge issue in friendships. Yeah. Like when one person opens up more than the other.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
it's also a good litmus test.
Yeah, it is a good litmus. It absolutely is. Jen.
I relate to both. My sort of friendship arc during the pandemic, I think may be in some ways unique to my life, but also ubiquitous to a lot of ours in that I also at the same time like lost a marriage and our family infrastructure fell apart. And so so in some cases, my very closest friends came in way tighter. They were a lifeline, a salvation, to be frank. And our friendships deepened during the pandemic / crisis. So I don't really know which one to blame. And then in some ways, kind of like you said, Marissa, my bandwidth was so shrunk and my capacity was diminished. And so I could also see some of the like tier 2 friendships, which took a fair amount of energy in the before times that I just did not have. And so some of those suffered and recovered, and some of them sort of went off into that good night.
Right, like a wrench drifting off into space. I felt the same thing, a deepening and a shallowing.
Yeah.
And I think that
Thank you.
it's a
Brevity
common,
is not my long suit.
No,
You
no.
just found a way to say that in 10 words.
Not your long suit.
Yeah. Thank you for shrinking that up.
No,
Yes.
it's often not mine either. But I felt the same thing, and I felt like, I think I even wrote this, that it was sort of like sending all of my friendships through a centrifuge, and that the thick ones were at the top and all the thin ones kind of disappeared. I also, I don't know if other people were doing this, if they were silently making a list in their head of people that they would allow to kill them. I mean, like if you were going to be interacting with them, like would you want it to be that friend? Like, which friend would you? But I'm morbid. Anyway, I'm just going to put that out there. So now, when I dove into this, I'm going to ask you this question first, Marissa, because you're the academic on the panel. When I first dove into this, I was surprised to see that the body of social science on friendships is actually rather anemic. It's underdeveloped, and depressingly so. And when you do come across stuff, it's kind of dopey bromides and self-help, often in peer-reviewed drag. It's just not very interesting. And then I found some stuff, but I think it explains why we don't have the right vocabulary to recruit to speak about friendship. And then I started talking to Marissa on Zoom. We were all Zooming together and having a lovely time. And Marissa had like 20 amazing studies that she's citing for this book that I had not come across. And I wanted you to talk about some of the more interesting kind of literature that you found, particularly the stuff that relates to what impedes us when it comes to befriending people. Because I thought that stuff was amazing.
Okay. First of all, I want to acknowledge peer-reviewed drag, because as an academic, that is an amazing term.
Yeah.
So what I've learned from studying the research on friendship and interpersonal interaction, one thing that really surprised me, do you know the people that are most likely to reject other people? It's the people that fear rejection the most. People high in something called rejection sensitivity, they tend to project that other people are rejecting them in ambiguous circumstances, and then they become cold, and they become withdrawn, and they reject other people that weren't actually rejecting them initially, so it tends to become sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then secondly, when researchers manipulated people to assume when they went into a group they'd be accepted, even though that was a lie, those people were actually accepted because they came off as friendly and more likable. It's a phenomenon called the acceptance prophecy. So one thing that I like to tell people around friendship is that if you want to make friends, you have to initiate, and you're going to be very afraid of rejection, but you have to assume people like you because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the second thing that I like to share is that according to the research, our social worlds are a lot safer than we think they are. There's research on a phenomenon called the liking gap, which basically finds that when strangers interact, they underestimate how liked they are by the other person. Similarly, there's research on a phenomenon called the beautiful mess effect, which basically finds that when we're vulnerable, we think people are rejecting us more than they actually are, and we underestimate how positively they're perceiving us as authentic and as honest. So the social world is more hopeful than you think, especially after the pandemic. And I think one of my big tips about making friends is assume people like you and get out there and initiate.
That's good.
That's so liberating. So people are judging you less than you think they are.
Absolutely, and that study on the liking gap actually found that the more self-critical you are, the more pronounced you were underestimating how much people liked you.
Oh, interesting. Eric, you also stunned me with stuff you knew that I had not run across. This has to do, it's also part of this body of literature. Where I thought it was interesting and the most robust was about our problem friends. And then you added even more, and I didn't know about any of this stuff, or about half the stuff that you were mentioning to me. And I think we're probably going to, at some point, get deeper into our problem friends here, but let's start at least by, can you tell us about what the literature shows?
Yeah, it was really surprising to me that we think we'd probably be most stressed around people we know are enemies that we don't like. And Julianne Lundstedt at BYU has done research, and actually it's our ambivalent friends that cause us the most stress. Those are the people that drive our blood pressure the highest, cause us the most anxiety. because.
And not people we hate, just to be clear, as
Yeah,
opposed to
with
people
people
we
with-
outright hate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Clearer.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Because it's the uncertainty. Are they going to be nice this day? Are they going to be a pain this day? Are they going to be this? And that's what drives us crazy is the uncertainty.
The ambiguity.
And but the thing that really blew me away, and I think this is what you responded to as well, is that 50% of the people we deal with fall into this ambivalent category. And we don't see ambivalent friends any less than we see the close friends. And when I tell most people this, they're surprised, but you think about difficult coworkers, neighbors, in-laws, friends of friends. There's a lot of people you see routinely you have to deal with that, it's difficult. And that's where so much, a disproportionate amount of the stress comes from, is not the people that you identify as enemies, but the people you're uncertain about.
Okay, so this tees up very nicely. Jen, I've only met you on Zoom once, but you instantly struck me as this remarkable combination of like exuberant transparency and tact. And you did, so it was to you that I wanted to ask, okay, so you have a difficult friend. What's the script? How do you handle those? We all have friends who cause us all kinds of conflicted, complicated feelings, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think probably instinctively you know who they are, right? Like, this isn't a huge mystery. Like, these are the ones that you are having those constant conversations with in your brain. And you're so good at it in the shower. So good at that discussion. And so I think there's a distinction to be made probably between what might be a necessary ending and what isn't. And I look at some of my relationships and think, in the long run, in the overhaul, from the 30,000 foot view, is this relationship mostly healthy? Like, does it primarily fuel me? Does it primarily energize me? Is it reciprocal? Is there a built-in mutual respect inside of it? And we're in a patch, right? We're having a rough patch, or we're having one particular issue that is sort of an anomaly to the relationship. Or does this friendship just constantly stress me the hell out, right? Is this the one where I am generally leaving it depleted, irritated, feeling invisible or unseen or unheard, frustrated? When the scales tip, I think that's when this comes into play. When it's time, when a relationship has become unhealthy or even toxic. And so getting out of that is so challenging, right? I think for the majority of us, confrontation in general is such a deterrent that we would stay in a stupid friendship for a decade, hating it, absolutely hating that person for hell's
People
bells,
stay
right?
in marriages for that reason.
Like for
They go to
marriages,
their
like
graves
we
like
would
that,
just
of course.
stay in and be irritated and frustrated because we don't want to have one hard conversation. It doesn't make sense.
Totally.
It doesn't make sense. And so there is a way through it that just requires maturity and sort of a measured response to that person. And this is not easy. I'm not suggesting that it is, but I do think there's a handful of guardrails to put around it. First of all, that needs to be a face-to-face conversation. Sorry, I wish that wasn't the system, but it is. Like, we're too old to text a breakup, but it needs to be in a calm moment, not in the heat of a discussion or a disagreement, or when you're already idling high. Like, you need to be calm and measured and face-to-face, and I think there's some ways through it. I think you start kind, and you say, at the beginning of this friendship, this was one of my favorite things about us. That you always made me feel seen, or I always felt like I could come to you and say anything, or I loved the way that you were in a room, and I felt supported by you, and I've always cherished that about you. That's always been like precious to me. Next, let me say this. I am sorry, because I have been feeling a different way for however long, and instead of being honest and even courageous to talk to you directly and frankly, I've just avoided it. and it's probably come out sideways. It probably came out as passive aggression. It probably came out in distance. You probably felt it, and that's because I was avoiding a conversation. That's my fault. And even here's some ways that I've contributed to some of a gap between our relationship. At this point in our relationship, when we are together, I no longer feel seen, cherished, safe, whatever the thing was that you said originally. I struggle to be myself. I find myself hiding how I'm actually feeling or what I'm actually wanting. I feel unseen, or I feel like this is no longer reciprocal. I feel resentful. Whatever it is, it's about you. It's not about them. This is not the moment to like list their sins, okay? I kind of hate how you are. That's not what we say. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even like you. That's not what we do. This is a moment to say, this is how I feel inside of our friendship, and it's my fault for not saying it sooner. And so at this point, I need us to have space in our friendship. Yes, it's hard. Yes, they will probably be angry, hurt, lash out, especially if that relationship is not reciprocal and you have done the lion's share of work inside of it, and that person's accustomed to taking advantage of you. Don't expect this to go well.
Well, that's the irony.
Don't expect it to go well.
The irony is that, right.
That's right. And yet, hold firm. And don't come back 3 days later because you can't handle the discomfort. Just sit in it.
I'm just going to say, I don't know, do Kindle singles still exist? Like, I'm embarrassed to say I don't know that. If you sold that direct transcript for 99 cents, I think like everyone in the world would buy it. I mean, that was really, I was not expecting something so perfectly crafted. I had sort of said to her, can you like think about it? Like, you just seem like you'd know that. That was insane. That was beautiful.
Well, that's because it's fake. Like, if I was sitting across from somebody, expect that to be way wonkier.
Okay,
but that will get you from point A to point B, even though it's hard.
Okay, let me now flip this around, and let's talk about best practices for how to keep good friendships. Like, what do you think, when people have healthy friendships, what do you think is going on? Because I'm sure you're pretty good at maintaining friends.
I'm a friend person. And my friendships to me are literally as precious to me as my family members. And so I don't know if this is too like demonstrative and melodramatic, but I don't have another gear. So I have always treated my best friendships, and that's a small crew for sure, they're not negotiable for me. I don't treat those as the first thing to go when I'm busy or when I'm stressed or when life is going sideways, that the friendship is the thing that's optional. I've never approached my friendships like that, neither have my friends. And so we have centered each other in our lives, even in the like early baby days when it was just a shit show, you know? Can we say that?
Yes.
Okay. We're just like, I don't know, just come over, let's just put our babies in the bathtub. Like, we just found a way to stay, because it's just time. That's what it is. It's time, it's proximity, it's attention, it's I'm in your life and you are in mine. And if we let that slide every time life slides, we will have no friends. Because life is always sliding. It's always sliding one way or another. And so my friendships they get a key priority in my life. We spend a ton of time together. And so when all these kids finally leave my house, will they? Will they? Somebody tell me. Please give me some good news. I need to know if they'll stay gone.
But your friends will be there.
They'll be there.
Because you've assigned value to them and you've prioritized them.
We have matching scooters.
So,
yeah.
Okay, it's not wedding rings, but it's like a thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Marissa, I'd love to ask you, I want to know what social science says about this. The one fact that I took away that I thought was, and there are a number of studies that sort of show what healthy relationships looks like, and I want you to tell me what they are. One thing that I found very interesting and slightly demoralizing, but we should know about it. This was a well-designed study in the Netherlands looking at a big age cohort. Every 7 years, about 50% of our innermost network gets switched out. So if you look at a photograph with you and your nearest and dearest from 7 years ago, about half of those people are now in your life, which is kind of, it's a little goose pimpling. It's a little sad, right? But it is, and it doesn't mean, so tell me, those who stick around, tell me how this works out. Tell me what,
Yeah. Yeah, so what makes a friendship likely to succeed? I remember for my book, I was interviewing this woman, and she told her friend she would go to a friend's dance recital. This was during the pandemic. And this woman ended up having some sort of strange illness. She's very sick. She didn't know why. It was the pandemic. She decided to tell her friend, hey, I don't think I can come to your dance recital. And her friend is appalled and tells her she's a terrible friend. She doesn't show up for her. She's abandoning her. What's going on in that friendship is there's a breakdown in something called inclusion of other in the self. And that's sort of a social psychology term for when we get close to someone, we include them in our sense of self. So what happens to them feels like it's happening to us. We naturally empathize with people we become close to. But when there's a breakdown in inclusion of others in the self, one friend can look to get their needs met at the expense of the other person. So that's where you have the sort of toxic friendships that come in. In a healthy friendship, you have something in the research world that's called mutuality, which basically means your well-being is as important to mine, and we're figuring out a way to negotiate this so that we can fulfill both of our needs at any given time. So what does that mean practically speaking, right? Let's say your friend calls you late at night, which is like 9:30 for me, but I don't know about the rest of you. Your friend calls you late at night because they want to talk about the latest episode of, I don't know, Survivor or something, and you just want to be like, I'm sorry, I'm too tired, I can't talk, right? That makes sense. But let's say your friend calls you at 9:30 at night and is like, my child is self-harming, and I need to talk to you about this, right? If you're engaged in mutuality, your boundaries are flexible based on your consideration of the friend's needs and your needs at any given time. And so what I think I see current day in friendship is there isn't that flexibility. I think we've been moving towards this culture of sort of like very rigid boundaries, right? Tell your friends you're not available. Tell them you're not there. Take the time to just focus on yourself, right? And that, I think, is true to an extent. Obviously, I think, this is a sucker punch against long-term movement of women feeling like they have to self-sacrifice and endlessly and just think about everyone else, right? But I think we just want to keep in mind that more broadly, we want to take care of ourselves and we want to take care of our people and we want to be in relationship with them. And that is taking care of ourselves over the long run.
I wonder if we pull the drawbridge in because, we are always making ourselves available in every other way. Like we reply to emails no matter when they're sent to us. We reply to texts, because I would not have said that we live in a boundary drawing moment. I would have said the opposite. So maybe our friends are paying the price for that because we have to be on call in every other way.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so, Eric, okay, I wanted to ask you about friendship and health, right? I think there's a lot of evidence that maybe they're good for you. I mean, you want to talk about
Yeah, there's
positive benefits?
tons.
Start with anything.
But there was
Anything.
UC Berkeley had a study of 9,000 people that basically says, positive relationships can add a decade to your life. There was a 2003 roundup of the research that, basically positive social relationships were second only to genetics in terms of predicting health and longevity. And specific to friends,
That's amazing.
Robin Dunbar, who's famous for the Dunbar number, the circlet, he was curious about, after you have a heart attack, 1 year later, what predicts whether you'll be alive or not? And he looked at all the research, and he came back with two things. Do you smoke? How many friends do you have? So literally, exercise, nutrition, it matters, no doubt. But the gulf between those two, smoking a number of friends, and everything else was to the point where he was comfortable kind of saying, don't smoke, have lots of friends.
So you could be a couch potato, but if you had friends.
His wording was actually even more extreme than that. He was like, you can lay around, eat whatever you want. He was having fun with it, but he said the gulf
But it's
was,
actually true.
yes,
It's in point
was
of fact
that,
true.
and even within friendships, your behavior counts in terms of your interactions. If was it Robert Garfield at UPenn, was basically, if you are not open and vulnerable with your friends about what's going on, the challenges you're facing, that it prolongs minor illnesses, increases chance of a first heart attack, and increases the chance that that heart attack will be lethal.
Gosh.
We are meant to be with other people. I mean, it's
Wow.
no wonder that the
Yeah.
pandemic was devastating for
That's
so
right.
yeah. You alluded to this before, Eric.
Yeah.
Is there a gendered aspect to friendship?
I mean, you definitely see differences. You know, whether it's innate, behavioral, you definitely see trends. You know, in terms.
Can you?
I mean, first
like
and
the
foremost,
cliches, right?
you know what?
The cliche, like guys are side by side, women are face to face. I mean, how much of that stuff is true?
You do see definitely that. I mean, men are not as good as at maintaining their relationships, you know, over time. It's if you ask, you know, married, you know, middle-aged or older women, who's your best friend, they'll mention another woman. If you ask men, you're very likely to hear my wife.
My wife, right?
And you know, and
Totally.
and if you look at, you know, like time use, women are more likely to spend their friendship time communicating. Men are more likely to spend it in mutual activities.
Yeah. So that's true.
The issue of proximity seems critical for men.
But like every dumb sitcom is actually right. Like that's actually.
I mean, just that, you know, it's like telling guys, you know, oh, you should call your friends. It's like that's probably not going to happen. Versus having something to do, having something third party to focus on and accomplish.
Yeah.
You know, again, for whatever reason, cultural or otherwise, it's like these are the trends you see, and it's probably what men are going to be more receptive to.
Go for it.
Do you see a difference in well-being? Like, is there a superior way if women are more communicative and vulnerable with their words, and men are more side-by-side activity-based, does it still have the same effect on their well-being, though?
See, what's interesting there is I'm not sure I'm not sure if there is a universal optimal or if it is gendered in that way. The impression I get from looking at the research is that it certainly would benefit men in general to be more open about what they're facing. It's like you mentioned the beautiful mess effect and stuff, you know, and stuff like that. Certainly there are issues for men in terms of displaying competence and stuff like that, expectations, but I don't think there's much doubt that, you know, a lot of men would benefit from opening up a little bit more, at least within the context we're talking about, friendships. You know, it's kind of like a lot of people feel like they don't get enough support from their friends. Yeah. If you don't talk about the challenges you're facing, I don't know how you expect your friends to help you.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to the social history of this because it wasn't always true that men were having such shallow friendships. If you look at pictures of men in the early 1800s, you see them cuddling. You see them holding hands with their male friends. You see them sharing beds with their male friends.
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln.
It's one of the it's the cliched example.
Yeah, and in the early 1800s, what happened was sexual orientation wasn't an identity. It was you should not have sex with someone of the same gender. But all of these behaviors could not indicate someone's sexuality. So you could hold hands with someone because you weren't having sex with someone of the same gender, and you could share a bed with them, and you could write love letters to them because all of that wasn't indicating someone's sexuality. It was simply don't have sex with someone of the same gender. And then around 1867, we had Sigmund Freud and another psychiatrist, Richard von Krafft-Ebing. And basically, they created the concept of sexual orientation as not just the sex that you have with someone, but this entire identity in their process of stigmatizing it and calling it a disorder. And so ever since then, we see this phenomenon called homohysteria, which is that straight men are afraid of being perceived as gay. Yeah. And so because of that, there's just so many behaviors that nurture friendship that can trigger men's homohysteria, such as being vulnerable, such as telling another friend, I like you, I appreciate you, you mean something to me. And so because of this history, we think it's like the natural way of things that men have these inferior connections, but I think we know from this history that men desire that closeness and that vulnerability just as much as the rest of us.
And they lost, so they lost the language for it, they lost every kind of cultural cue. It's a Krafft-Ebing.
Richard von Krafft-Ebing.
No, I know, but I'm saying it's a Sorry, I was making a very bad pun. Just ignore it. It didn't work. I almost had it. It was like within reach, and it slipped off the shelf.
So close.
Forget it. Never pun in a panel. Okay. Anyway, but I'm just thinking about this is like a lost skill, a lost art. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It is sad. And it's everyone's loss because it puts more pressure on a marriage if you're So tell me, what is it that you think, that you see, that people struggle with the most in friendships?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think it's fear of rejection. I think if we didn't fear rejection, we would take a lot more initiative in friendship. And I think the problem is, of course, we're a lot less likely to be rejected than we think we are, but we never actually test this assumption because, we just have this assumption, and that keeps us from ever actually trying to put ourselves out there and knock on our neighbor's door and say, hey, I just moved in and I'd love to connect with you, right? And so there's this theory that I really like called risk regulation theory, which basically argues that we are either in self-protection mode or pro-relationship mode. Self-protection mode is, I'm not going to reach out to you because I'm afraid you're going to reject me, right? Self-protection mode is, I'm not going to be vulnerable because you can exploit me. And that is antithetical to pro-relationship mode, which is, I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to tell you how much I like you. I'm going to tell you how much I value you. And the problem is, I think we don't realize when we're in self-protection mode that that's not just protecting us because it's inevitably harming our relationships. And so according to risk regulation theory, in order to be really good at making friends, we need to get other people out of self-protection mode into pro-relationship mode. And so that is why people want to be friends with people that show them that they won't reject them. The secret to making friends, the secret to being likable, according to these theories, is really to show people that you like them. Because then they're going to feel safe enough to invest in a relationship with you.
Okay, I like that answer. The only thing is that sounds like what might impede what might hinder someone from becoming a friend. I'm 52. I'm not afraid of rejection at this point in my life. When I'm thinking about my friendships and what makes them complicated and what I'm struggling with in friendships of very long-standing, I'm trying to figure out, what people, I wrote about a lot of this, and I'm curious what everybody on this panel thinks about this. Envy is something that very few people feel comfortable speaking about. It's very hard to talk about envy in a friendship. I tried to address it. I wrote about it in my story. And a friend of mine then said to me, fine, you didn't write about anger. I mean, think about the satchels of anger that some of us have and carry around, and that goes unexpressed for years toward friends. And I thought, wow, I could have done 2,000 words about that, and I didn't. And it's true. It's a big thing. I'm just trying to figure out the things. So when you were talking about like a reluctance to make oneself vulnerable, yes, I have a friend who would sooner have an organ removed than say something about herself that in any way made her seem vulnerable. And I said at one point that it was like playing, strip poker with somebody who is in a down parka. You're just like every time. It's very frustrating. I'm just, and I think those can really erode, your friendships over time. So I'm trying to figure out what people are struggling with, whether they're age specific.
Mine would be empirical, anecdotal, probably at best.
No, but you're talkers, all of you. And,
we are.
Observers,
That's so damn true. I lead a large community of women, so I have a lot of this conversation is centered in our community, and I don't think it's one thing. I don't. It's too big of a complex issue to reduce to kind of one key through line. But I can say that two really common issues I see around established friendships and why are they hard. What makes them hard or what makes them become hard. One of them is transitions in that our lives are changing. So for some of us, it's we are going from being single to married, or we're going from being married to divorced, or we're going from having no kids to kids, or kids to empty nest, or we move. The transitions are hard on friendships. When all of a sudden some of the connective tissue that we had is loosened, or we hit the thing at different times, and all of a sudden some of the shared stuff is missing. I see transitions as being a real culprit.
Asynchrony.
Real
it's
culprit
a big deal,
in friendships that weaken bonds. And then the other one that I tend to see most often, and that also I've experienced, is a reciprocity problem. In that sometimes in adult friendships, it either from the jump, because it was doomed to begin with, or it becomes so that one friend is doing and giving more than the other. That's the listener, it's the solver, she's the fixer, she's the responder, she's the one that jumps in and says, how can I help? And with very little on the receiving end, just in terms of mutuality. And that's just the death knell. Like after a while, that is so corrosive to a healthy relationship. And then resentment, of course, starts to build, and then anger, And then, so those are two of the things that I see in adult friendships that tend to capsize the boat quicker than some of the other stuff. What do you think?
Well, I mean, to your point, it was a piece of research I found really interesting was that a lot of people think, bad times, bad transitions, and that was exactly the word they used, your word, are stressful, and bad transitions are stressful. But the thing is, all life transitions are stressful.
Yeah.
And when you see people's lives change dramatically for the better, they're still changing. It's like whether somebody, starts making tons of money or starts shifting anything, which at distance we might say, oh, that's a good problem to have. It can still be a problem. And it's like that, it is so hard. I mean, for people who are potentially shifting metaphorically from one world to another, it's difficult for them and it can be difficult for everyone around them.
The friend who said to me, you should have spoken more about anger, takes tremendous pride in whenever another friend of his succeeds, he calls them up and says, I'm so sorry, which I think is really, it's a joke, but it's great. It kicks open a door, to your point.
Well, but that's so wonderful that person initiated it, because the problem on the other end of success is you're not allowed.
You can't.
Oh, it's so terrible having all
can't
this money.
bitch,
You're
right?
not
You
allowed
can't
to
bitch,
say
right.
that.
No.
Yeah. And if you say it is great having all this, now you're a braggart. You can't win.
Right.
And then you're denying what's going on, which is the opposite of being open.
Right. So what I saw in the literature that I was the most responsive to was failures of reciprocity. It was transitions. It was asymmetry, betrayals. Marissa, you want to?
I mean, I just want to add to all the beautiful answers that we've heard so far. And that is, I feel like in friendship, we often fail to make the unspoken spoken.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that there's reciprocity issues, and there's these transition issues, and we never speak their name. And so they just corrode the friendship in silence. And it's like, I just think when we think about our romantic relationships, imagine if we never spoke about any issues with our romantic partners. Like, who would stay in a relationship? Yet we expect that friendship, we shouldn't need to have these open conflict conversations. And I feel like if there's one thing I've learned from studying friendship so intensively, it's that a relationship is a relationship is a relationship. And the things that you've learned that have helped your romantic relationship succeed will also make your friendship succeed. And we need to see these skills as more transferable.
Okay, it's so good. And it's a perfect segue into what I think should be sort of our final round here before we open it up to everybody else. You've just done this book, which I can't wait to read. It's going to be really good. So make the case for why we should assign a higher value to our friendships, right? Because we don't have a well-developed vocabulary for talking about friendship. We don't say the things we should be saying. We're not as demonstrative.
Yeah.
You're so right. And in fact, so one of Philip Roth's dear friends said to me, I can't believe Philip Roth had such a close friendship in this particular way with this fellow. He said, what Roth gave me were the feelings I couldn't give to myself. And he made me feel like my best self was my finest self. Philip Roth, who I think of as being nothing but serrated edges, It's a very wonderful thing to think. So what you just said is so wonderful. Like, let's actually speak those parts out loud.
Yeah.
But talk for a minute about like why we should be assigning higher values to friendship across the board.
Yeah.
What's the case to be made that we're being bad?
Yeah, I've certainly been taught to love on a hierarchy, and I came to friendship with much regret that I wasn't seeing the value of my friends. And after a breakup, I started this wellness group with my friends where we met up each week, and I saw just how much they loved me at a difficult time. And I thought to myself, why didn't this love matter? Like, this love has been here all along, and yet I felt without a romantic relationship, I had no love in my life, but I always did. And why hadn't this love mattered? And as I delved deep into the history for this book and the psychology, what I've realized is it's not radical to prioritize friendship even above romantic partners, because that's been true throughout history. Romantic partners were chosen for practical reasons. You would choose a partner that would, enhance your family name or give you resources. And friends were the relationship that people went to for true and deep intimacy. And so, I think that if we look back at history, we realize that we don't have to trap friendship in this box of once a month happy hours that we've put it in, and that a friendship can be every bit as deep and every bit as powerful as any of the other relationship Goliaths in our life, like our parents, like our spouses.
And we have more, excuse me, and we have more friends than we have spouses. I mean, that's it, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's right.
I mean,
right.
hopefully.
Math game.
Yeah, right, if you're
Yeah.
Elizabeth Taylor. But I mean, yeah, right? So, yes. So, also another, yes. But I love that point about, right? Yeah, marriage until 10 minutes ago was like not even for any other reason other than, right.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful answer, Marissa. It's really hard to add to that. I feel like that's the thesis for why friends should be prioritized. There is something about being deeply loved by people who are just choosing you. You know, you didn't birth them. You know,
Right.
They're not protecting their inheritance.
You're not legally
You're
bound
not
to
their
them.
kid. Whatever it is, they're just choosing you because they love you. And that has so many ancillary effects on my heart that my friends just love me and I love them. Like, we have love songs. Like, we're like the olden days. Like, we tell each other how much we love each other, and we're demonstrative with our words and our affection, both emotionally and physically, and having that group of people who just choose one another is powerful. It really is. It's powerful, and it takes some of the pressure off the ones who don't get to unchoose us. You know, they're stuck with us. I mean, they like us too, but like, I've told the people that are in my life with family bonds, I'm like, you just don't even know how much my friends take off your plate. You don't even know. Like, you should write them all thank you notes. You know what I'm saying? Like, it releases our family bonds to not have so much pressure put on them to be our everything, to love us in all the complete ways we need to be loved as human beings. I cannot get a visual of my life without my friends. I have no imagination for it, and I don't want to. And so they're too deep and too precious and too special to imagine a day without them. And so whatever it takes to keep them healthy, to keep the conversations on the table that need to be had, like any given relationship that matters to us, to give them a longest shelf life, to have reciprocity and mutuality and just like beautiful shared love, it's all worth it. Every single hard conversation, every single thing that we do to prioritize that, all the time that we spend, the hours and minutes we give, all matters. It all matters. Because plus we're going to live 10 years longer. We're going to live longer. We're going to have less heart attacks. I like it. What do you want to add?
Well, I mean, Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman did research and found that friends make us happier than any other relationship. And there's an irony there, there's tremendous irony that the relationship that brings us the most happiness is the one that has no institution backing it.
Yeah.
You know, you have a contract with your employer, you have marriage with your spouse, blood with your kids, and you have a problem with your marriage, go see a marriage counselor. Problem with your kids, see a child therapist. Problem with your friends, they die like an old goldfish, just thrown away. Just, there's not any institution backing. There's no metaphorical lobbying group, you know, for friends, but the ironic benefit there, the good thing there, is that someone is only your friend because you like them, because they make you happy. It is never an act of obligation. It is an act because they make you happy, you make them happy. That makes friendship fragile, but it makes it pure and true because you don't have to be there.
And that's, I was just going to say, it could be an irony, or it could be actually the result,
Absolutely.
right? Mm-hmm. The fact that you're not bound by blood or by a contract or anything, that might be the very reason that they give us so much joy. We opt in, and it's the very thing that makes us...
And you can easily opt out.
And right, it's what makes them fragile and what makes them beautiful and special and perfect. And it's what also makes them so devastating when they end.
That's right.
More devastating in some ways than, which we can get into maybe during the Q&A, but I'm interested in that too. So we've got about the right, almost 15 minutes. We went a little over. And the mics can now, I don't know how that works. That lovely woman with the mic will be wandering around the room, and okay. I saw a very exuberant hand go up,
Yeah,
and now
yeah,
I can't
yeah,
remember.
yeah.
Help me out. Where?
This one came up first.
Which one came up first?
Right, on the
Yep,
front
yep,
row.
okay, right over there.
Right out
Yep,
of the gate.
Yep, that's what I thought. Okay.
Eric, could you focus on the over 65 group for a moment? There's no question that those of us who are baby boomers are focusing on longevity.
Yeah.
And as you said, socialization certainly contributes to longevity, and the opposite, loneliness causes premature mortality.
Yeah.
But yet the people that don't have a lot of friends by the time they're 65 frequently have a hard time making friends.
Yeah.
And then when a spouse dies, that compounds itself tremendously. My question then is, what do you tell a person who knows that they're supposed to have friends but have a hard time making friends?
That's a good question.
And, you know, and if I could just say one, Claude Fisher, the sociologist at is he Stanford, I think, he once said something very devastating that addresses this head on, that no one is lonelier than an old man. That is the single loneliest demographic category. And so it's an important, so take it away. I mean, like what can one do to broaden,
I mean, one thing I found really interesting in researching was the issue of loneliness, was that basically it's associated with like every negative health thing you can possibly imagine, to the point where I'm shocked insurance companies don't like mandate you run out and hug your friends. But the thing is that John Cacioppo was the leading researcher on loneliness, and what he found is that lonely people don't spend any less time with others than non-lonely people do. You know, loneliness, because we've all felt lonely in a crowd. You know, that being in the middle of Times Square, you can be surrounded by people. That doesn't mean you don't feel lonely. You know, so loneliness is how you feel about your relationships. You know, it was a Faye Alberti at University of York did research basically showing that before the 19th century, the concept of loneliness didn't really exist. You know, because we were all embedded in tribes, groups, religions, you know, that we always felt connected. We had an idea that others were associated with us. So loneliness is a perception issue. Not that it's not real, but just when you're alone and you feel like you have bonds, we have a good word for that. It's called solitude. It's called me time. It's a good thing. When you feel like, even if you do have people, but you don't feel like you're close to them, that's when the negative effects of loneliness kicks in. In terms of making friends, I think Marissa contributed probably the best part there, was in terms of that issue of, you know, honestly showing those things. For my book, first thing I wanted to do was look at everything from how to win friends and influence people. Look, basically Mythbusters, Dale Carnegie. And most of his principles, which were all before the advent of social science, almost everything was true, except for putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. We're terrible at that. But, you know, how to win friends and influence people is a great thing. But I think Marissa can speak to the specifics and the research on that better than I can.
oh, go on.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for your question. So I think aside from assuming people like you, making sure that you're initiating, because friendships, we think they happen organically, but they don't. When they happen organically, there's a few ingredients in place, and that's continuous unplanned interaction and shared vulnerability, which we get in school, right? We see people every day. We have recess, we have lunch, we have, you know, gym class where you can share that vulnerability. But as adults, a lot of times we don't get that. And so the question is, how can you recreate those environments and create infrastructure for that in your life? So I suggest thinking about an interest, joining a group wherein you can pursue that interest in community with other people, and to stay within that group for at least 2 to 3 months. And that's because you'll be capitalizing on a phenomenon called the mere exposure effect, which is our unconscious tendency to like people the more familiar they are to us, and for them to like us the more familiar we are to them. And so join a group, stick it out a little bit, assume people like you, and initiate interaction with the people that you like outside the group.
Can I throw in one thing about Cacioppo's research that I think is really relevant here? He had also looked at the data that married people live longer, right? Because they're not as lonely, right? They've got somebody, and also somebody who's going, that mole on your back, get that thing checked out, right? But it's both, though. It's also having it's companionship, too. And then he looked at people who were lonely in their marriages and discovered that there was no health benefit at all. And I was going to ask you, you were saying that like there's a correlation between friends, how many friends you have, and how long you live. Is it how many or how deep the bonds are? Because you might only need one friend or two. I'm not sure. Is it a question of volume or depth?
For most of the research puts quality over
It's quality, okay.
No doubt. Dunbar specifically did say number of friends. I mean, you know, but that specific research he did. In general, quality and depth is more important.
It seems like that would be my intuition. Yeah. So I would say like yeah. Anyone else? You had your hand up early. Yes. And I like that men are asking questions.
Me too.
Yeah. When I wrote this story, I was told it was a chick story, and I got really mad.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, this has to do with that.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting out here. I'm an older guy. I have a lot of guy friends. And I'm curious. I'm listening and I'm hearing the stories from women, and I'm imagining in my mind, and I might be wrong, I'm imagining that you're talking about your girlfriends. And when I'm talking or hearing you, I'm hearing you say, we men have to have activity to maintain our friends. But what about men and women having friendships that are not sexual? That seems like it's a problem.
The when Harry met Sally
Very
question.
tricky.
Okay.
So tricky.
Whoever does the Cats' scene on the panel gets a medal.
Somebody else want to take this one?
Do you have evidence for this?
Yeah, we need the academic perspective on this.
I mean, there's a bit of a logical fallacy because then bisexual people can't be friends with anyone. You know? And that's all I'll say, and I'll push it to my panel mates.
Oh my God.
It's probably what, less? Yeah.
This is not satisfying. You can do better.
Yeah.
There has to be a way to address this.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have data around this.
I was just going to say,
I
there's
don't know,
bad
I'd just say
data around this generally.
experientially, some of my absolute closest friends as a grown-up lady are my men friends. And those almost entirely, with almost no exceptions, are old friendships. We've been through the fires together for a couple of decades. Now, I don't know if it cancels them out because they're attached to my women friends. They're attached to my best friends, but they're like brothers. And so, I don't know, culturally, it's suggested to us that it is a problem, as you said. In my life, it has been a great joy to have men in my life that love me as a friend and have demonstrated remarkable friendship toward me. But I don't know, you guys are the ones with the research in your pockets on this.
Yeah.
I know some research, but I don't know if it's that satisfying. I mean, actually, the research is mixed over whether men report more intimate relationships with woman friends versus men friends. Either it's equal, men tend to report that they have equal intimacy with their men and women friends, or they report they have more intimacy with their women friends than their men friends. So that's, I think actually, cross-gender friendships tend to provide a real resource. We also see in the research that when men are vulnerable, women tend to judge them less than other men will. And so if we want men to lean into that vulnerability, which I think is really the fundamental issue in men's friendships, is a vulnerability issue. I think men tend to access that through their relationships with women. So because of that, I think there's great potential for friendships across gender.
Yeah, I think it's easy, you're not professionally competing, you're not sitting there and comparing how you look. I mean, I think there are many, it makes things much less vexed. I mean, I would say one of my very, very closest friends is a man. I mean, and I just think that there are all sorts of dynamics that are utterly absent. But the scholarship around friendship is really anemic, and it's unimpressive in the main. The research money goes into marriage, right? Because that's a pillar of our institutions, parent-child relationships. These are, you can't get funding for studying friendship until recently, right? I mean, this was a challenge.
I had to pull. I had pulled from like the
So your question
social
is
interaction
great.
research. Yeah.
So you can't be mad at us for this being unmatched.
No, but
That's not our fault.
I'm trying to give you what I
Nobody
think
will
is a
study.
legitimate,
Yes.
that if you're looking for, I mean, I couldn't find what I thought was satisfying scholarship around what I thought were reasonable questions. And this is like, I'm sorry, pedestrian questions. Yours is not as pedestrian. And look, we're all sitting here going, yeah, I mean, so.
I went from writing a love chapter in my book to a friendship chapter, and I'm reading a love chapter, and I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to read all of this research? There's so much. Oh God, once this chapter's done, it's going to be so much. Yeah, well then I got to have friendship. There's nothing.
Right.
Like, there's nothing. Like I'm going to have to start. I'm going to go back to writing fiction. Like it's like there was. So it is a really hard question in general, and I think that area in specific, I don't think science has gotten there yet.
Yeah, I spoke to one of the older researchers in the field, and he just said that the money was just
a
not.
vacuum.
It was a vacuum. Yeah. Yes. Both of you and then you.
Do it.
Okay, I'll start. Just to speaking to that last topic, 3 of my very dearest friends on this earth have been men, and they've all been 35 to 45 years older than I. We shared very intense personal conversations, artistic interests. In some cases, we work together on projects and things, but so that's really possible, but I don't know about same-age friends. You know, they kind of come and go and drift through your life. But my question is actually, my next-door neighbor and I, wonderful person, and I talk about getting goats, which would get us kicked out of our neighborhood association. But we also talk about having a commune. Is there any... And there are women that I love that I would love to live with, and none of their husbands think it would be a good idea for us all to live together. So they want to keep us kind of separate.
Yeah.
Is there any research on community living, co-living with people, intentional co-living, or do you become contractually bound and then it loses the magic of free friendship once you form a commune?
Just anything on that?
Is this where, once again, we'd say that there's a lacuna in the research that we actually don't know? It's a wonderful question.
It's a wonderful question.
I think once you impose all of the, when friends go to marriage or to couples counseling, once you elevate the practices of friendship to this other level, do you start to experience the same vexations, would be the question.
Yeah.
And the same,
Yeah, and it's something else I've learned from studying friendship and from like queer communities, asexual communities, is that romance doesn't always accompany sex. Romance is feeling like you idealize someone, you're passionate about someone, you want to spend all your time with them. And we see that in friendship too, quite normally. I mean, it's called romantic friendship, but I think when you look at best friends, you hear them say, you're my soulmate, I love you, I want to spend all my time with you, right? And so sometimes you can see with friends, there's also this bit of romance in that you're really passionate about your friend and you idealize them and you see all of the best in them. And then I think with these romantic friendships, a lot of times we do see some of the dynamics that we tend to see in spousal partnerships. Like people get more jealous, they get more territorial. But the hard part about in friendship is that the other person hasn't necessarily consented to that, right? You may feel like this is a romantic friendship for me. You probably wouldn't use those terms. But the other person may not know that you have that sense of this friendship. And so it can get really dicey and really complicated. I think some of the same reasons I really love friendship are the reasons why it can be so difficult and so fragile, because there's not clear expectations, because it's fluid and because it's ambiguous. But there actually has been a lot more talk recently, especially in like Gen Z, about platonic life partners, like people choosing life partners for friends. And obviously it's not something that is easy legally right now, but it's a thing that I think a lot of younger generations have been thinking about more and more, and there has been historical precedent for that as well.
So my question is about teens and tweens, a conversation that Marissa and I started this morning. What are the impacts of social media and the pandemic on teen and tween friendships? Because they seem difficult, they seem challenged, and so I wanted to just sort of ask, like, what are you all seeing in terms of those younger friendships and even their ability to make friends seems harder than what it was for us growing up and through adulthood.
Okay, we're going to close on that because we are at 0 seconds right now. So one of us can answer that. And just going back to the co-living question, occurs to me, it's also urgent that we think about it because, of course, lots of people don't have kids, and about a quarter of women my age are child-free, right, or childless, and about a quarter of them, I think, are unmarried, right? So it was a great question that you asked. Who wants to take the question about kids?
I have 5. The expert. Is this mine? I'm drowning in teens and tweens. So I have 5 kids. They're 16 to 24. And so during the pandemic, we were all in middle school, high school, and college. And so I can just tell you what it looked like in our community, my house being one of them, and just my community at large. The pandemic was brutal on their friendships, absolutely brutal. They're already immature relationally. They just don't have the depth of knowledge or maturity or wisdom or compromise. They're not measured. They're all over the place. They're on an insane roller coaster just on the daily. And so you apply that to their friendships, and everybody is that disoriented. They were all that discombobulated, and they turned on each other a lot. And so we're still clawing our way forward. A lot of friendships fell by the wayside, and we're trying to figure out which ones made the cut. Why did they make the cut? What was your contribution to the ones that didn't? Because all teenagers, no teenager has ever done anything wrong. It is your fault. It is y'all's fault. It's their friend's fault. It's their teacher's fault. The teacher made them get a D. And so they're not very self-aware, and they're not very contrite. And so it's a lot of work to parent these kids through their losses, their friendship losses, when they don't have the emotional chops. It was hard on us, and we're grown. So if you are talking about this from a perspective of a parent, you're just not alone. Do know that it was a quagmire of parenting kids through the pandemic in a million ways, and friendship was one of them. So I don't know. You know what they'll do? They'll tell us how we got it all wrong, okay? Just wait. Just give them a couple of years. They'll write it out for you how you could have done better.
On that note,
yeah.
I think we're going to
Yeah.
we're going to end. Thank you for